Keanu Reeves buys a car at his own dealership, stops cold when he hears two customers behind him. A Hollywood legend walks into a car dealership wearing faded jeans and a wrinkled flannel shirt. His long dark hair is tucked beneath a worn baseball cap. 3 days of stubble covers his jaw. Nobody recognizes him. Nobody even glances his way. But what he witnesses over the next 48 hours will shatter everything he thought he knew about his own business. An elderly couple trying to sell their dead son's car gets offered pennies by a cruel manager. Two employees plot to squeeze every dollar from grieving parents. And when the truth finally explodes into the open, not a single person in that showroom will ever forget what happens next. This is not a movie. This is real life. The morning sun bathed the sleek automobiles in the dealership lot, their polished surfaces gleaming like liquid gold beneath the brilliant California sky. Inside the glass-walled showroom of Reeves Automotive, salesmen stood at attention, their sharp suits and carefully rehearsed smiles a permanent fixture of the business. Every movement, every handshake, every carefully crafted offer was calculated to maximize profit. It was another busy Saturday, just like countless others before, but today was different. Among the customers browsing the dealership was a man who blended seamlessly into the crowd. His worn jeans, simple red and black flannel shirt, and relaxed posture suggested he was not shopping for anything extravagant. His long dark brown hair, slightly disheveled, was tucked beneath a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. 3 days' worth of stubble covered his angular jaw. To the sales staff, he appeared to be just another middle-aged man looking for reliable transportation. His name was Keanu Reeves. What they did not realize was that he owned the entire dealership chain. Keanu had built Reeves Automotive from nothing 5 years earlier, shortly after wrapping his final action franchise. While most Hollywood stars invested in restaurants or tech startups, Keanu had chosen something different. He wanted to create a business that reflected his values, a place where ordinary people could purchase vehicles without being deceived, pressured, or manipulated. He named it after himself not out of vanity, but as a personal promise. His reputation would stand behind every transaction. Over the years, his dealership chain had expanded across multiple California locations, gaining a reputation for offering quality automobiles at fair prices. The business had become his passion project, a way to stay connected to regular people and prove that honesty could still thrive in a cutthroat industry. But as his company grew, so did the distance between him and the daily operations. Film projects, charity commitments, and his motorcycle company demanded his attention. He had started hearing troubling whispers from customers. Stories of aggressive salesmen, unfair trade in evaluations, dishonest pricing that appeared only at the final moment of signing. On paper, everything looked pristine. Reports from his managers painted pictures of smooth operations and satisfied clientele. But Keanu knew better. Numbers did not tell the complete story. People did. So today he had arrived undercover, not as the famous actor, not as the wealthy owner, simply as a customer. He wanted to experience firsthand how his employees treated people when they believed nobody important was watching. Keanu wandered past rows of gleaming vehicles, occasionally pausing to run his fingers along a hood or peer through a window. A salesman noticed him almost immediately and approached with a confident stride. "Good morning, sir," the young man said, flashing a practiced grin. "Looking for something in particular today?" Keanu offered a casual smile, playing his role perfectly. "Yeah, I'm in the market for something reliable, maybe a used sedan. Nothing too fancy." The salesman nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm. "We have some excellent options. Let me show you what we've got in the back lot." Keanu followed, listening politely to the sales pitch, but his real attention was elsewhere. Years of studying human behavior for film roles had taught him to recognize subtle details that others missed. The nervous glances exchanged between employees, the body language of customers shifting uncomfortably, the conversations happening in hushed tones near the finance office. And then he heard it. Please. A woman's trembling voice carried across the showroom. Isn't there anything else you can do? Keanu turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes landing on an elderly couple standing at the trade, in a valuation desk near the service entrance. The man was tall but slightly hunched with age, his silver hair neatly combed back from a weathered face that spoke of decades of hard work. His wife stood beside him, gripping his weathered hand with both of hers, her face creased with deep worry. Their vehicle, a well-maintained but older Ford sedan, sat parked just outside the service bay, looking conspicuously humble among the dealership's gleaming newer models. Behind the counter stood Marcus Bennett, the dealership's sales manager. Keanu recognized him from quarterly reports, but had never met him in person. Marcus was the kind of man who prided himself on closing high-profit deals, and from the cold impatience dripping from his voice, it was immediately clear he had absolutely no interest in sympathy. "I'm sorry," Marcus said with a practiced shrug that conveyed zero genuine regret. "This is the best offer I can make. That vehicle isn't worth much in today's market. You're actually fortunate I'm offering this amount at all." Keanu took several steps closer, pretending to inspect a nearby SUV while listening intently. The elderly woman wiped at her reddening eyes with a crumpled tissue. "But this car belonged to our son," she said, her voice breaking on the final word. "He passed away last year. We kept it as long as we possibly could, but we just cannot afford the repair bills anymore." Keanu felt his chest tighten. He understood loss intimately. He had experienced more than his share of grief throughout his life. The pain in this woman's voice resonated with something deep within him. Marcus sighed with theatrical exasperation, glancing at his expensive watch as if the conversation was wasting his valuable time. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of condescending patience. "I understand this is emotional for you. I really do, but sentimental value doesn't add dollars to an appraisal. The market price is the market price. I don't make the rules." The woman's lower lip quivered as tears escaped down her weathered cheeks. "It's not just a car to us. It's the last piece of him we have left. Tommy drove this car every day to the firehouse. He was so proud of it." The elderly man squeezed his wife's hand, his jaw tightening visibly. He was trying desperately to remain strong, but it was painfully clear this decision was breaking them both. "Tommy was a firefighter," the man added quietly, his voice thick with restrained emotion. "He died in the line of duty, saving a family from a burning apartment building. This car was everything to him." Marcus, however, remained utterly unmoved. His expression did not soften even slightly. "The offer stands at $2,000, he stated flatly. "That's already generous considering the mileage and overall condition. If you want to move forward, we can complete the paperwork right now." He gestured dismissively toward the exit. "Otherwise, I have other customers waiting." Keanu felt his blood pressure rising steadily. The sheer coldness of Marcus's response infuriated him beyond words. This was not merely a disappointing deal. This was predatory. This man was exploiting grieving parents at their most vulnerable moment. He stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel beneath the surface. "What exactly is going on here?" Marcus turned sharply, clearly annoyed at the interruption. His eyes swept over Keanu's simple clothing with obvious dismissal. "Sir, this is a private discussion," Marcus said curtly. "I'll be with you in a moment." Keanu maintained his neutral expression, though inside he was seething. "I apologize for intruding, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." He nodded toward the elderly couple with genuine warmth. "I'm actually in the market for a vehicle myself, and that sedan outside caught my attention." The elderly couple looked at him with surprise and confusion. Walt Morrison studied this stranger's face, trying to understand why anyone would interrupt on their behalf. Marcus's eyes narrowed with suspicion and irritation. That vehicle is being traded in. It's not available for direct purchase. Keanu rubbed his chin thoughtfully, maintaining his undercover persona. I might be interested in buying it directly from these folks. What's the trade in value you quoted them? Marcus hesitated for just a moment before answering. $2,000. Keanu raised an eyebrow slowly, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. 2,000. For a well-maintained sedan in that condition. He shook his head with visible disbelief. That seems remarkably low. Marcus's expression darkened considerably. It's an older model with significant mileage. That's a fair market evaluation. Keanu looked directly at the elderly couple, his warm brown eyes meeting theirs with genuine compassion. I'll offer you $5,000 for that vehicle. Cash. Right now. The showroom fell into stunned silence. Dorothy Morrison gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest. Walt stared at Keanu as if he had just witnessed a miracle. Oh no, Dorothy whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. What couldn't possibly accept that? You don't even know us. Keanu held up a calming hand. Let's step outside and talk privately, away from the sales floor. Marcus's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. You can't just come in here and undermine our business practices. That's not how this works. Keanu turned to face him directly, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. We'll discuss that later, Marcus. His voice carried a weight of authority that seemed completely incongruous with his casual appearance. A very long discussion about exactly how you run things around here. Marcus froze, suddenly uneasy. Something about this stranger's tone sent an unexpected ripple of fear through him. But he could not yet comprehend why. He had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. Outside, away from Marcus's calculating gaze, the elderly couple finally introduced themselves properly. Walt and Dorothy Morrison had been married for 54 years. High school sweethearts from a small town in Northern California. They had raised 3 children, but Tommy, their youngest, had always been special. He wanted to be a firefighter since he was 5 years old, Walt said, his weathered voice cracking slightly. Used to wear his plastic helmet everywhere, even to bed. Dorothy smiled through her tears at the memory. He made us so proud. 22 years with the Los Angeles Fire Department. Saved more lives than we could ever count. What happened? Keanu asked gently, though he suspected he already knew. Walt swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing with the effort of containing his grief. Apartment fire in East L.A. Family trapped on the 4th floor. Tommy went in when everyone else said it was too dangerous. He paused, struggling to continue. Got them all out. Mother, father, 3 little kids. But the floor collapsed before he could make it back to the ladder. Dorothy gripped her husband's arm, steadying herself. The department gave him a hero's funeral, full honors. The mayor spoke. Firefighters came from all over the state, but none of that brings him back. Walt finished quietly. Nothing ever will. Keanu nodded slowly, feeling the weight of their loss pressing against his own heart. He understood grief. He had lost people dear to him throughout his life. He knew that some wounds never truly healed. They simply became part of who you were. This car, Keanu said, gesturing toward the modest Ford sedan. It meant something to Tommy? Everything, Dorothy replied. He bought it right after he graduated from the academy. Paid for it himself, every penny. Said it was proof that hard work paid off. She touched the hood gently, almost reverently. After he passed, we couldn't bear to sell it. We kept it in our garage, started it every week just to hear the engine run. It felt like a piece of him was still with us. But the repairs became too expensive. Walt added with resignation. Medical bills from Dorothy's hip surgery. Property taxes going up every year. We're on a fixed income now. We had no choice but to let it go. Keanu reached into his back pocket and pulled out a simple leather wallet. He counted out 51 $100 bills and held them out to Walt. I meant what I said. $5,000. The car is worth at least that much, probably more. Walt stared at the money, his hands trembling. Sir, this is far too generous. We can't accept this. You can? Keanu said firmly but kindly. And you will? But why? Dorothy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know us? You don't owe us anything. Keanu smiled softly, the warmth reaching his eyes in a way that made him look nothing like the hardened action heroes he portrayed on screen. Because some things are more important than money, he said simply. Your son gave his life to save others. That kind of sacrifice deserves to be honored, not exploited. He paused, looking at the sedan with newfound respect. I'm not going to resell this car, he continued. I'm going to restore it. Keep it in Tommy's memory, maybe even donate it to a firefighter training program someday, so other young people can learn to be heroes like your son. Dorothy Morrison broke down completely, her sobs racking her thin frame as Walt wrapped his arms around her protectively. Even the stoic old man had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He would have liked you, Walt managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Tommy would have really liked you. Those words struck Keanu harder than he expected. He thought about all the people who had worked in his dealerships over the years. The customers who had walked through those doors, hoping for fair treatment. How many of them had been exploited by employees like Marcus Bennett? His stomach twisted with a mixture of shame and determination. His own business had become something he never intended. A corporate machine that pried on vulnerable people like the Morrisons. Before anyone could say another word, the glass doors of the showroom burst open behind them. Marcus Bennett stormed out, his face flushed crimson with barely contained fury. I need a word with you. Marcus snapped at Keanu, completely ignoring the elderly couple. Right now. Keanu exhaled slowly, pressing the cash firmly into Walt Morrison's weathered hands. Go cash this, he said quietly but with unmistakable authority. Drive your son's car home with pride. Park it somewhere safe. Walt hesitated but recognized the finality in Keanu's tone. He nodded gratefully, shaking Keanu's hand with surprising strength for a man his age. Thank you, Walt said simply. Thank you more than words can express. As the Morrisons walked toward their son's beloved sedan, Marcus's fury finally erupted without restraint. What the hell do you think you're doing? Marcus seethed, stepping aggressively close to Keanu. The smell of expensive cologne and raw desperation filled the space between them. Keanu remained perfectly calm, his posture relaxed but alert. Years of martial arts training made him acutely aware of every muscle in Marcus's body, every potential movement. Helping a customer, Keanu replied evenly. Isn't that what we're supposed to do here? Marcus scoffed with undisguised contempt. That's not how this business works, buddy. You just cost this dealership thousands of dollars in potential profit, and you completely undermined my authority in front of my entire staff. Your authority, Keanu repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. I wasn't aware your job description included squeezing every last penny from grieving parents whose son died saving lives. Marcus's eyes flashed with dangerous intensity. Look, I don't know who you think you are, wandering in here dressed like some homeless guy and interfering with legitimate business transactions. But this is my showroom, my territory, and you need to leave. Now, who I think I am? Keanu repeated, his entire demeanor shifting subtly but dramatically. For the first time, he straightened to his full height. He removed the baseball cap, letting his distinctive long dark hair fall freely around his shoulders. His warm brown eyes, usually gentle and compassionate, now burned with cold authority. I own this dealership, Keanu stated, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute power. I own every single one of them. Reeves Automotive. My name, my company, my rules. The words landed like a thunderclap. Marcus's face went completely slack. The blood drained from his features so rapidly, he appeared almost ghostly. His lips parted slightly as his brain struggled desperately to process this catastrophic revelation. What? He finally managed to choke out, his voice barely a whisper. Keanu reached into his wallet again and produced a simple business card. He held it up between two fingers, directly in Marcus's line of sight. The card bore his full name in elegant script above the Reeves Automotive logo. "I'm Keanu Reeves," he said, his voice sharp as tempered steel. "The actor, the owner, the man who built this company from absolutely nothing, because I believed business could be conducted with honesty and integrity." He took a deliberate step forward, and Marcus actually stumbled backward. "And I just witnessed you disrespect those customers," Keanu continued, his voice rising slightly to carry across the parking lot where several employees had gathered to watch. "I watched you lie to them about their vehicle's actual value. I observed you treating this establishment like a predatory operation designed to exploit vulnerable people at their lowest moments." Silence descended like a heavy blanket. Every employee within earshot had frozen in place. Some leaned in, pretending to continue their work while eagerly absorbing every word. Others simply stared openly, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed satisfaction. Marcus stammered desperately, searching for any words that might salvage his rapidly disintegrating situation. I didn't know who you were," he managed weakly. "Sir, I was just following standard procedures. I was just doing my job, maximizing dealership profits. Isn't that what every owner wants?" Kanu's expression remained ice cold. "So because you didn't know who I was, you thought it was perfectly acceptable to take advantage of those elderly people. Is that your defense?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again, then tried once more. "Sir, if we start making emotional decisions and giving away money to every sad story that walks through the door, we'll go bankrupt within a year. It's just business. Nothing personal. It's not business." Keanu replied, his voice heavy with disgust. "It's greed, pure and simple." Marcus made one final desperate attempt. "Mr. Reeves, please. I've been with this company for 3 years. I've consistently exceeded sales targets. My numbers are the best in the entire region. If you'll just let me explain." "Your numbers," Keanu interrupted, "are built on the tears of people like the Morrisons. Built on deception and manipulation and preying on those who don't know better." He turned to address the gathering crowd of employees directly, his voice carrying with natural authority across the entire lot. "How many of you have been taught to pressure your customers?" he asked, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. "How many of you have been instructed to lowball trade, in values, even when you knew the vehicles were worth significantly more?" An uncomfortable shuffling rippled through the group. No one spoke, but several employees exchanged meaningful glances. "How many of you have watched customers walk away from this dealership feeling cheated?" Keanu continued, feeling like they had no power, no recourse, no one on their side. Still no one spoke, but a few cast accusatory glances toward Marcus. The truth was written clearly in their uncomfortable silence. Finally, a young salesman stepped forward. His name tag identified him as Jake Sullivan. He was perhaps 25 years old, with honest eyes and a nervous energy that suggested he was taking a significant risk. "It happens constantly," Jake said, his voice cautious but gaining strength with each word. "Mr. Bennett encourages it, demands it, actually. He tells us to always undervalue trade-ins, even when we know the cars are worth more. He pushes us to add unnecessary fees and extended warranties that customers don't need or want." Marcus whipped around, his face contorted with rage. "Shut your mouth, Jake. You're fired." "No," Keanu said firmly, stepping between them. "He's not." He looked at Jake with genuine appreciation. "Thank you for your honesty." That took courage. Jake swallowed hard, then continued with growing confidence. "We're instructed to push higher interest rates on customers who don't ask questions, especially elderly clients or anyone who seems financially unsophisticated. We target people who don't know how to negotiate." Another employee, an older man named Frank Henderson, who had worked at the dealership since its opening, stepped forward as well. A lot of us hate what's been happening. Frank admitted, his weathered face lined with years of moral compromise. But we have families to support, mortgages to pay. We were afraid of losing our jobs if we spoke up. Marcus turned pale as more employees nodded in agreement. The walls of his carefully constructed kingdom were crumbling around him. That's a lie, Marcus sputtered desperately. They're all lying to save themselves. I was just following the playbook that every successful dealership uses. Keanu's gaze locked onto Marcus with devastating intensity. Is it a lie, Marcus? Because I've been here for nearly 4 hours. I've watched you interact with multiple customers. I've observed your tactics. I've seen the fear in people's eyes when they sit across from you. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I built this company to be different. Keanu continued. I created Reeves Automotive because I believed that honest business could succeed, that you could treat people with dignity and still turn a profit. I put my own name on these buildings because I wanted my reputation to guarantee every transaction. His voice dropped to a register of profound disappointment. And you turned it into everything I despise. You made my name synonymous with the very practices I created this company to combat. Marcus was visibly trembling now. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Mr. Reeves, please, he begged, all pretense of authority completely gone. I can change. I can adapt to whatever policies you want. Just give me another chance. I have a family, too. A mortgage. Kids in private school. Keanu studied him for a long moment, and for just an instant, something flickered in his eyes that might have been sympathy. Then it hardened again. You should have thought about your family before you decided to destroy others, Keanu said quietly. You're fired, effective immediately. Collect your personal belongings and leave the premises within 30 minutes. He turned to address the security guard, who had been watching from near the entrance. Please escort Mr. Bennett to his office and ensure he takes only what belongs to him personally. Nothing else. Marcus's face cycled through a rapid succession of emotions. Shock, denial, rage, and finally, bitter acceptance. He yanked his expensive tie loose, as if it were suddenly choking him. You'll regret this, Marcus hissed as the security guard approached. This industry doesn't reward saints. You'll learn that the hard way. Keanu watched him go with an expression of quiet finality. There was no satisfaction in firing someone, no joy in destroying a man's career. But there was necessity. Sometimes protecting the innocent required removing those who would harm them. As Marcus was led away, muttering curses under his breath, Keanu turned back to the assembled employees. Their faces displayed a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, uncertainty, hope, fear? I know this is sudden, Keanu said, his voice softening considerably. And I know many of you are worried about what happens next. Let me be clear about something. He paused, ensuring he had everyone's complete attention. No one else is losing their job today, not unless they choose to leave. A collective exhale passed through the group. But things are going to change, Keanu continued. Starting right now. Starting this very minute. From this moment forward, every single customer who walks through these doors will be treated with honesty, respect, and fairness. No exceptions, no excuses. Jake Sullivan raised his hand tentatively. Sir, what about the commission structure? If we stop pushing unnecessary add-ons and inflated pricing, how do we maintain our income? It was a fair question, and Keanu appreciated the young man's directness. I'm implementing a new compensation system immediately, Keanu announced. From today onward, bonuses will be based primarily on customer satisfaction scores, not just raw sales volume. If you treat people fairly, if you earn their trust and their repeat business, you'll make money, potentially even more than before. Frank Henderson scratched his gray head thoughtfully. That's actually kind of revolutionary. It's called sustainable business. Keanu replied with the hint of a smile. Treat people well, and they come back. They tell their friends. They write positive reviews. They become advocates for your brand. It's not charity. It's smart strategy. He glanced around at the gleaming cars surrounding them. I didn't become successful by cheating people, he added. In my film career, I've always believed in doing the work properly, treating everyone on set with respect, and letting quality speak for itself. The same principles apply here. The employees exchanged glances, and something shifted in the air. The fear and tension began dissolving, replaced by something that resembled cautious optimism. That afternoon, Keanu converted the conference room into a temporary command center. He ordered lunch for the entire staff and spent 3 hours in intensive meetings, reviewing procedures, examining past transactions, and listening to employee concerns. The stories he heard made his stomach turn. There was the single mother who had been pressured into financing a vehicle at 23% interest because Marcus had insisted she would not qualify for better terms. She would have qualified for half that rate with any legitimate lender. There was the elderly veteran who had traded in his late wife's car and been offered $800 for a vehicle worth at least $4,000. He had accepted because he did not know any better and trusted the dealership to be honest. There was the young couple who had purchased their first family car and discovered, only after signing, that Marcus had added over $2,000 in unnecessary protection packages they had never requested. Story after story, family after family. Trust betrayed again and again. Keanu instructed his assistant to compile a comprehensive list of every customer who had been overcharged, missold, or treated unfairly during Marcus Bennett's tenure. The list grew disturbingly long. We're contacting every single one of them. Keanu announced to his staff, we're going to apologize personally. We're going to make things right. Refunds, adjustments, whatever it takes. The Jake Sullivan's eyes widened. Sir, that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Keanu nodded slowly. I'm aware. But some debts cannot be measured in money. Some debts can only be repaid with integrity. By late afternoon, Keanu was personally making phone calls to wronged customers. Hello, Mrs. Patterson. This is Keanu Reeves. Yes, the actor. I also own Reeves Automotive, where you purchased your vehicle last March. I wanted to call and personally apologize for the way you were treated. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds before a woman's incredulous voice responded. Wet, Keanu Reeves. The movie star, you're calling me? Yes, Mom, and I'd like to make things right. He heard the emotion in her voice as she described her experience. The pressure tactics, the hidden fees, the feeling of being trapped and powerless. She had spent months believing there was nothing she could do, that she had simply been foolish enough to fall for a scam. We're issuing you a full refund on every unauthorized charge, Keanu told her. And I want you to know that the person responsible for your treatment no longer works for this company. When the call ended, he leaned back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied. This was only the beginning. There were dozens more calls to make, hundreds more wrongs to right. But for the first time since arriving at the dealership that morning, Keanu felt like his company was finally aligned with his values again. The next morning, Keanu arrived at Reeves Automotive to find something extraordinary. A line of customers stretched from the entrance nearly to the street. People who had heard the rumors. People who wanted to see if the stories were true. People who had been wronged and now hoped for justice. What's happening? Keanu asked Jake, who was standing near the entrance with a clipboard. The young salesman grinned broadly. Word spread fast. Social media, local news, word of mouth. Everyone's talking about what happened yesterday. About you firing Marcus. About the refund calls. Keanu looked at the waiting crowd with a mixture of amazement and humility. They're here because they want to believe. Jake continued. They want to believe that a business can actually be honest. That someone in power actually cares about regular people. Throughout the day, customers poured in. Some came to have previous deals reviewed. Others came simply to experience this supposedly reformed dealership for themselves. Many just wanted to shake Keanu's hand and thank him for standing up against predatory practices. Michelle Turner arrived around noon. She was a woman in her mid-30s with determined eyes and a thick folder of paperwork clutched against her chest like evidence in a trial. "Are you really the owner?" she asked Keanu directly, studying his casual appearance with obvious skepticism. "I am," Keanu confirmed. "How can I help you?" Michelle took a deep breath and launched into her story. 18 months earlier, she had purchased a used Ford Explorer from this very dealership. The salesman had assured her the financing was affordable and straightforward. But when she returned home and examined the paperwork carefully, she discovered they had added nearly $3,000 in fees she had never agreed to. "I tried calling back," Michelle explained, her voice tight with remembered frustration. "I got transferred from person to person. Everyone said it was too late to make changes, that I should have read the contract more carefully before signing." Keanu took her folder and examined the documents meticulously. The evidence was clear and damning. Unauthorized charges for extended warranties, paint protection, fabric coating, and gap insurance, none of which Michelle had requested or been properly informed about. "This is unacceptable," Keanu said quietly, his jaw tightening. "And this is going to be corrected today." Within an hour, Michelle Turner walked out of Reeves Automotive with a refund check and a personal apology from the owner himself. She stood in the parking lot for several minutes, staring at the check as if it might evaporate. "I thought I would never see that money again," she admitted to Jake, who had helped process her refund. "I had given up completely." Jake smiled. "Things really are changing here. I know it's hard to believe, but Mr. Reeves means what he says." By evening, the dealership had processed refunds for 17 different customers. The total exceeded $40,000. Some corporate executives might have considered this financial suicide. Keanu considered it redemption. But while Reeves Automotive was experiencing its renaissance, someone else was watching very closely. Someone who was not at all happy about these developments. Victor Ashford had built Ashford Premium Motors into one of the most profitable dealership chains in Southern California. His methods were simple and effective: aggressive sales tactics, psychological manipulation, squeezing every possible dollar from every possible customer. To Victor, customers were not people. They were resources to be exploited. Numbers on a spreadsheet, means to an end. When news reached him about Keanu Reeves personally firing his sales manager and issuing mass refunds, Victor's first reaction was amusement. Another naive idealist who would learn the harsh realities of the automotive industry. But as days passed and he watched Reeves Automotive's reputation soar, while his own customer traffic dipped noticeably, his amusement curdled into genuine concern. By the end of the week, Victor decided to make a phone call. Keanu was reviewing sales reports in his office when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Reeves speaking. Well, came a smooth, practiced voice. The famous movie star playing car salesman. How amusing. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who is this?" "Victor Ashford, Ashford Premium Motors. I'm sure you've heard of us. We're one of your biggest competitors." "I know who you are," Keanu replied evenly. "What do you want?" Victor chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. "I want to give you some friendly advice. One businessman to another. I'm listening." "What you're doing over there?" Victor continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "The refunds, the fairness crusade, the customer first nonsense. It's admirable, I suppose. In a naive, doomed sort of way." Keanu waited silently for him to continue. "But here's the thing, Reeves. This industry doesn't reward saints. It never has, and it never will. You can play the hero for a few weeks, maybe even a few months. But eventually, the bottom line catches up with everyone." "Is that a warning or a threat?" Keanu asked. Victor laughed. "Consider it professional courtesy." I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen dozens of idealists like you come and go. They all burn out eventually. The market is ruthless. The customers forget your good deeds the moment someone offers them a lower price. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. I appreciate the advice, but I think I'll keep doing things my way. Your way, Victor repeated with audible derision. Your way is going to cost you millions. Your way is going to drive you out of business within 2 years. Mark my words. Maybe, Keanu acknowledged. Or maybe you're wrong. Maybe people are actually starving for honesty. Maybe they're tired of being treated like prey instead of customers. Victor's voice turned cold. Don't say I didn't warn you. And don't expect me to sit back and watch while you try to destabilize an entire industry. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm coming for your customers, Reeves. Every single one of them. If you want to play this game, you'd better be prepared to lose. The line went dead. Keanu stared at his phone for a long moment, processing the conversation. Victor Ashford was not making idle threats. He was declaring war. The first salvo came 3 days later. Jake rushed into Keanu's office, his face pale with concern. Sir, we have a serious problem. What's happening? Jake handed him a printed advertisement. It was a full-page flyer from Ashford Premium Motors, promising prices that seemed impossibly low. They're undercutting every single one of our offers, Jake explained. Across the board. Customers are walking out of our showroom and heading straight to Ashford. Keanu examined the flyer carefully. The prices were indeed remarkably low. Too low. There had to be a catch. These numbers don't make sense, he said slowly. There's no way they're making profit at these rates unless they're planning to make it up with hidden fees on the back end. Jake finished. The old bait and switch. Keanu nodded grimly. Victor was playing a dangerous game. Lure customers away from Reeves Automotive with attractive front-end pricing, then squeeze them during financing and add-ons. How many customers have we lost today? Keanu asked. Jake hesitated. 7 walkouts so far, all heading directly to Ashford. By the end of the week, the number had grown to over 30. Reeves Automotive's sales had dropped by nearly 40%. Employees were getting nervous. Even Jake, usually optimistic, was showing signs of concern. Sir, Frank Henderson said during a staff meeting, I hate to say this, but maybe we need to reconsider our pricing strategy. If we can't compete with Ashford's numbers, we're going to bleed customers indefinitely. Keanu shook his head firmly. We're not going to compete by deceiving people. That's exactly what Victor wants. He wants us to abandon our principles and become just like him. Then what do we do? Another employee asked. Just watch our business disappear. Keanu stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where far fewer customers browsed than the previous week. We tell the truth, he said finally. We'll show people exactly what Ashford is really offering them. The next morning, Reeves Automotive launched its counter campaign. But instead of lowering prices, Keanu took a completely different approach. He created a simple educational campaign, a comparison guide that helped customers understand the total cost of purchasing a vehicle. Not just the sticker price, but everything. Financing rates, documentation fees, dealer preparation charges, add-ons and warranties. The message was straightforward. Don't just compare prices, compare total cost. More importantly, Keanu invited any customer who had recently purchased from a competitor to bring their paperwork for a free review. No pressure, no obligation, just honest analysis. The results were immediate and dramatic. Customers who had been lured to Ashford Premium Motors with low sticker prices discovered they had been hit with thousands of dollars in unexpected charges during the financing process. Extended warranties they never requested. Dealer fees that had not been mentioned. Financing rates significantly higher than they qualified for. One by one, these customers came to Reeves Automotive, paperwork in hand, faces flushed with anger and embarrassment. They told me I was getting such a great deal. One young man said, shaking his head in disbelief. I felt like I'd won the lottery. Then I got home and actually read everything I'd signed. Keanu helped each person understand exactly what had happened. He could not always fix their situations legally, as contracts had been signed. But he could offer them honest service on any future purchases, maintenance work at fair prices, and most importantly, the knowledge to protect themselves going forward. Word spread rapidly. Social media exploded with comparisons between the two dealerships. Local news stations picked up the story. A consumer advocate blog wrote a feature article titled, David vs. Goliath, How Keanu Reeves is Fighting for Honest Car Sales. Within 2 weeks, the tide had turned completely. Customers flooded back to Reeves Automotive. Not just former customers, but new ones too. People who had never purchased there before but were drawn by the reputation for integrity. Victor Ashford, meanwhile, was experiencing the opposite trajectory. Negative reviews poured into his online profiles. Complaints accumulated with the Better Business Bureau. His sales staff, trained in manipulation rather than service, struggled to adapt to increasingly skeptical customers who now knew exactly what to watch for. Then came the hammer blow. A former Ashford employee, a young salesman named Derek Williams, walked into Reeves Automotive one afternoon carrying a manila folder stuffed with documents. I quit my job this morning, Derek announced. I couldn't take it anymore. The things they make you do to people there, it's not right. Keanu invited him into his office and listened as Derek described the systematic practices at Ashford Premium Motors. The mandatory upselling, the deliberate confusion tactics, the targeting of vulnerable customers, the falsification of credit applications to secure higher interest rates. I have proof, Derek said, sliding the folder across the desk. Internal memos, training materials, commission structures that reward deception. Keanu examined the documents carefully. They were exactly what he suspected, but seeing the evidence in black and white still made his stomach turn. Why bring this to me? Keanu asked. Derek shrugged, looking exhausted but relieved. Because you're the only one fighting back. Everyone else in this industry just accepts this stuff as normal. You're proving it doesn't have to be that way. Keanu considered his options carefully. He could go public with these documents, exposing Victor Ashford completely. But that felt vindictive, destructive rather than constructive. Instead, he made a different choice. He contacted the California Department of Motor Vehicles and the State Attorney General's office. He provided them with Derek's evidence, along with documented complaints from affected customers. He let the proper authorities handle the investigation. Sometimes justice required patience rather than spectacle. The regulatory investigation moved swiftly once initiated. Auditors descended on Ashford Premium Motors within days. Customer complaints that had been ignored for years suddenly received official attention. Victor Ashford tried desperately to contain the damage. He fired sacrificial employees. He claimed ignorance of any wrongdoing. He hired expensive lawyers and public relations firms. None of it helped. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern of fraud was systematic. The victims numbered in the hundreds. 1 month after Keanu's undercover visit to his own dealership, Victor Ashford stood before television cameras announcing the immediate closure of Ashford Premium Motors, due to changing market conditions and unforeseen challenges. Victor read from a prepared statement, his face haggard and drawn. We have made the difficult decision to cease operations. He took no questions from reporters and disappeared into a waiting car. The criminal investigation continued even after the dealership closed. Several former managers faced fraud charges. Victor himself narrowly avoided prosecution by cooperating with authorities, but his reputation was destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. His fortune, built on the exploitation of thousands of customers, evaporated in legal fees and settlements. Keanu watched the press conference on his office television, feeling no satisfaction. There was nothing celebratory about watching another person's destruction, even someone who had caused so much harm. "You don't look happy," Jake observed, standing in the doorway. Keanu shook his head slowly. "I'm not. Victor made his choices, and those choices had consequences. But he's still a human being. He probably had reasons, however misguided, for becoming who he became." He turned off the television and faced his young employee directly. The goal was never to destroy him, Jake. The goal was to protect people. To prove that business can be conducted differently. Victory isn't measured by defeating your enemies. It's measured by how many people you help along the way. Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'm starting to understand that." 1 year later, Reeves Automotive had transformed into something remarkable. The dealership chain had expanded to 12 locations across California, each one operating under the same principles Keanu had established. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest in the industry. Employee retention had improved dramatically as workers discovered they could make good money while still maintaining their integrity. More importantly, other dealerships began adopting similar practices. Keanu's success had demonstrated that honesty was not just ethically superior, but also economically viable. The ripple effects extended far beyond his own business. On a quiet Saturday morning, exactly 1 year after that fateful undercover visit, Keanu arrived at the original dealership to find an unexpected visitor waiting. Walt and Dorothy Morrison stood in the showroom, looking healthier and happier than when he had last seen them. Beside them was a beautifully restored Ford sedan, gleaming under the showroom lights. "We heard you were looking for this," Walt said with a warm smile. Keanu approached the vehicle slowly, running his fingers along the perfectly polished hood. "Tommy's car," he said softly. "You restored it." Dorothy nodded, her eyes bright with tears but smiling. "After you gave us that money, we didn't need to sell it anymore. We used some of it to fix it up proper, the way Tommy would have wanted. And we wanted you to have it," Walt added. "Not to keep. To share." Keanu looked at them with confusion. "I don't understand." Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a framed photograph. It showed a young man in a firefighter's dress uniform standing proudly beside this very vehicle. His smile was infectious, his eyes full of life and purpose. "Tommy always talked about giving back," Dorothy explained. "He said the best gift wasn't something you kept for yourself. It was something you passed along to others." Walt gestured toward the car. "We want you to donate it to the Fire Academy training program, like you mentioned when we first met. Let new firefighters learn to drive it. Let Tommy's legacy help create more heroes." Keanu felt emotion rising in his chest, threatening to overflow. He had made that suggestion a year ago as a spontaneous act of compassion. He never imagined these grieving parents would actually make it happen. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. "This is your last piece of him." Walt shook his head firmly. "No, son. Our memories of Tommy are our last piece of him. This car is just metal and glass and rubber. It should be out in the world doing good, not sitting in our garage collecting dust." Dorothy took Keanu's hand in both of hers, her weathered grip surprisingly strong. "You taught us something important that day," she said quietly. "You taught us that kindness still exists, that strangers can become family, that doing the right thing matters even when nobody's watching." She paused, her eyes glistening. "Tommy would have been so proud to know you. He would have called you a true hero." Keanu could not respond immediately. He stood there, holding this elderly woman's hands, feeling the weight of unearned praise pressing against his shoulders. He was no hero. He was just a man who had tried to do the right thing. But perhaps that was what heroism really meant. Not dramatic rescues or impossible feats. Just ordinary people making the choice to be decent when they could have easily chosen otherwise. Later that afternoon, Keanu gathered his staff for a special announcement. "I want everyone to see something," he said, gesturing toward the restored Ford sedan, now parked proudly in the showroom's central display area. He told them the story of Walt and Dorothy Morrison, of their son Tommy who had given his life saving strangers, of a car that represented sacrifice, duty, and love. This vehicle will be donated to the Los Angeles Fire Academy next week, Keanu announced. It will help train the next generation of firefighters, and it will carry a plaque with Tommy Morrison's name, so everyone who sits behind that wheel will know the legacy they're continuing. The employees applauded, many with tears in their eyes. Frank Henderson, who had worked at the dealership from its earliest days, stepped forward. "Can I say something?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "I've been selling cars for 37 years," Frank said, his weathered voice thick with emotion. "Worked at a lot of dealerships, seen a lot of owners come and go. Most of them talked about integrity and customer service. None of them actually meant it." He paused, composing himself. "You're different, Mr. Reeves. You're the real thing. And I just want you to know that working here, being part of what you're building, is the proudest I've ever been in my entire career." A murmur of agreement passed through the assembled staff. Jake Sullivan raised his hand. "I second that. A year ago, I was ready to quit this industry completely. I hated who I was becoming. You gave me a reason to believe that business could actually be about helping people." Other employees shared similar sentiments. Stories of personal growth, relationships with customers that had become genuine friendships, pride in representing a company that matched their values. Keanu listened to each one, humbled beyond words. "I appreciate everything you've said," he finally responded. "But I want you all to understand something important. I didn't create this culture alone. You did. Every single one of you made the choice to embrace these principles. You chose integrity when it would have been easier to fall back on old habits." He looked around the room at faces that had become like family over the past year. "I named this company after myself because I wanted my reputation to guarantee our standards. But the truth is, you're all putting your reputations on the line every single day. Every interaction, every transaction, every customer relationship. You're the ones living these values, not just talking about them." He smiled warmly. "So thank you. Thank you for proving that a different way is possible. Thank you for believing in something bigger than just making money. Thank you for being exactly who Tommy Morrison would have been proud to know." As the meeting concluded and employees returned to their duties, Keanu walked outside into the California sunshine. He stood for a moment, looking at the building that bore his name, feeling a sense of peace he had not experienced in years. He had started his dealership wanting to prove that business could be conducted with integrity. That treating people fairly was not just morally right but practically smart. He had succeeded beyond his expectations. But the greater lesson, he realized, was simpler and more profound. Kindness was contagious. The one act of compassion toward grieving parents had inspired employees to reconsider their own practices, had motivated a whistleblower to expose corruption, had encouraged customers to demand better treatment, had forced an entire industry to question its assumptions. The stone he had dropped into the water that day had created ripples extending far beyond anything he could have imagined, and that was the true measure of success. Not profits or market share or professional accolades, but the positive impact left on other human beings, the chains of kindness stretching forward into a future he would never see. Keanu pulled out his phone and looked at a text message that had arrived earlier that morning. It was from Walt Morrison, accompanied by a photograph. The image showed Walt and Dorothy standing outside a fire station, surrounded by young cadets in training uniforms. Tommy's restored car was visible in the background, already beginning its new purpose. The message was simple. "Thank you for proving that good people still exist in business. Tommy would have been proud of you." Keanu saved the photograph to his permanent collection. Someday, he knew, he would look back on this past year as one of the most meaningful of his entire life. not because he had defeated a rival or expanded his business empire, but because he had remembered something essential, something that every person knew instinctively but often forgot in the rush of daily survival. That people mattered more than profits. That integrity was its own reward. That the measure of a life was not what you accumulated, but what you contributed. And that kindness, genuine and freely given, had the power to transform not just individual hearts, but entire communities. As he walked back into the dealership to greet the day's customers, Keanu Reeves carried that knowledge with him, like a quiet flame, a reminder of who he wanted to be, a compass pointing toward the person he was still becoming. The work was never finished. The journey was never complete. But every step taken with honesty and compassion was a step worth taking. And that, in the end, was enough. Thank you for following this story! Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you, and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.